Right. Well, this is I'm formally welcoming you all now. And I am very happy to just be moderating this discussion between Matt and Ted because I'm kind of in the dark. I don't know much more than you all know. And I'm interested to hear what's going on in the UK. Why has this Attorney General done an about face with her lack of permission to the Campbell family? I'm just going to be listening like the rest of you and learning like the rest of you. So, uh, who wants to start this discussion? Ted? Just maybe just one little thing is, you all will be able to ask questions at the end, and that's we're hoping for a lot of good questions, mostly questions, hopefully, on this topic. Um, we ask that you ask one question and that it not be a long paragraph or two that has to be read. It would be very nice just to ask one question. And if you have a second question, we can allow that, but at the end of the other questions. So I think with that, take it away, Ted. And Ted, you have one more thing?
Yeah, well, I'll just say a couple words and then hand it over to Matt. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in this afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. The reason we thought we would have this call is to talk about the recent development, which is a huge victory on a long path to getting a new inquest into the death of Matt's brother, Geoff, on 9/11. But we thought now that we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, that we really wanted to try to demystify this process and elaborate in person, not that we're together in person, but over at least over video, speak about why this is such an important initiative, and if it goes forward, how it can help the cause of 9/11 truth. So that's really the goal of it, and I think that really we want to be able to answer questions. I think we can dedicate at least half of this hour to answering questions that folks have so that we can actually demystify the process. Matt and I just spent an hour with the barrister, Nick Stanage, answering questions that we had, that had been on our mind for the past 2 years or whatever. So there's so much about this process to unpack, and we won't get through all of it today, but at least to give you and everybody who'll be watching this in the future a better idea of this whole process and why it's so important. So with that, I will hand it off to Matt. And my name is Ted Walter. I'm the executive director of the International Center for 9/11 Justice. Matt, as you know, lost his brother Geoff on 9/11, and he'll speak more about that. And Fran, thank you so much for moderating this conversation.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Fran. I guess if I just very briefly indulge myself and go back in time, a quick recap as to why we've even got to the point where we are talking to the Attorney General in the UK and why they made this decision a week ago. So my brother's remains were identified, first of all, in 2002, then 2004 and 2008. And if those remains are repatriated back to the UK, because his death was violent and unnatural, by law, there has to be what's called an inquest in this country. And so that's held in a coroner's court. And the idea there is to say, who the person was, where they were, when it was, and how they came about their death. And they're very specific questions that are supposed to be answered. And from that, they make a legal determination of effectively the cause of death. And so fast forward from those years to 2013, in January, an inquest was held because they had to by law. And, they came up with pretty much the official narrative: unlawful killing, overseas terrorism. And the key thing that we took out of it was that AA-11 hit the North Tower, and that's what caused the collapse of the North Tower and subsequently my brother's death. It specifically was new remains that were found about 4 months later in May 2013 that got me thinking, a few years down the line, what if I could repatriate those remains and automatically trigger a new or fresh inquest? And that was the early seeds of, is there a way of actually getting this inquest reopened, getting all the evidence that has been amassed over the years, getting all the necessary legal help, and actually start to to go down the path of trying to get it reopened. In the UK, the only mechanism to try and get an inquest reopened when such a period of time has passed, so we're talking now, 5, 6, 7, 8 years on from that inquest, is through a bit of legislation called, and it's Section 13 of the Coroners Act in the UK. And it's a specific mechanism where you can challenge either because of insufficiency of inquiry, or new evidence, or in the interests of justice, reasons why you can get a new inquest into someone's death. And these are routinely submitted in the UK for all sorts of reasons. So it's not like a special mechanism we're trying to do. They are routinely used. So August 2021, after spending a sort of year preparing it, we submitted a 2,500 page application to the Attorney General, where you effectively have to apply for their authority. They have to give their authority, say, yep, you've got good grounds to reopen your the inquest. We sat and waited for 22 months. And so in June this year, towards the end of June, we had a very brief response. I think it was like a page and a half, a couple of paragraphs on their grounds for what the reasons why they were refusing permission and the reasons why it wasn't in the interests of justice. We'll go into detail about how ridiculous those reasons were. They were irrational. They were actual illegal and lawful decisions that they were making that weren't based on the test they're supposed to apply with our application we put forward. And anyway, because it's an authority, we have this mechanism called judicial review, which is basically you threaten litigation against the Attorney General, which is a bit peculiar because they are in theory the highest elected office of law in the land, but that's what we were trying to do. And just before the deadline, which was the 26th of September, because you have 3 months to file in the High Court, we had sent off, oddly enough, on the 11th September, the full grounds are basically our argument as to why the decision was an unlawful one. And against all the odds, I mean, we did discuss it as a possible outcome, but the outcome was they actually withdrew the denial of them denying the us reapplying for a fresh inquest, and they're going to make a fresh decision. But I mean, we can go into what that means, and that's I guess the purpose of this evening. But it was I think a major victory, but it's one of many that we've got ahead of us. But it was really significant. Things would have got very hard for us should they have actually stood the ground and gone into court. We would have won, but you're then talking more time, more money, which is the classic way in which lawfare tends to play out. But yeah, so it was fantastic news. Barrister's very happy, I'm very happy, and my family's very happy that we got that decision withdrawn by the Attorney General. I think that's a quick recap of where we are today.
A quick question. Am I understanding correctly that you were applying for a permission to go to the High Court? Is that right?
Yeah, we would have done it. So yeah, what you do is we gave the Attorney General 14 days to respond to our grounds, our substantive grounds for our case. And should they not have backed down, we would have had to file in the High Court for permission from the High Court to allow us to judicially review the decision of the Attorney General. And there's so many possible steps and paths that could have taken us once we'd actually filed. So although we prepared everything in terms of the legal bundles, that pretty much everything, because we had no time to do this, we thankfully didn't have to do that. They backed down, which although there's no official records held on it, we think it's possibly the first time that a Attorney General has backed down when threatened with judicial review on a Section 13 application, i.e. trying to reopen an inquest. That is very, very significant in itself. They would have lost in court. Clearly, that's the decision they made. That the decision they gave us back in June was, an unlawful one and didn't have any legal basis at all.
And you had not done this. You had not threatened the Attorney General yet, but they knew you were going to. Is that correct?
But no, we did. So on the 11th, it's part of what's called a pre-action protocol, and normally it's in the form of a kind of letter with a skeleton argument, but we actually submitted the full substantive grounds, which is a 21-page document, and so it laid out the entire case, and they were crushed every single point basically, and that's why they backed down.
I see. Okay.
Ted, anything to add to that?
Yeah, in case there's also what the application itself is doing that was submitted 2 years ago is also seeking the authority to apply to the high court, in case that was what you were asking. But with the actual application itself, what it is doing is asking the attorney general for the authority to then, for the family to then apply to the high court, and it is the high court that orders the new inquest. So that is now what Matt and his family are waiting for, is a new decision from the attorney general as to whether the attorney general will grant the authority to apply to the high court. Now, as far as we know, maybe Nick brought up maybe one example today, but by and large, every time the attorney general grants the authority to apply to the high court for a fresh inquest to be ordered, the high court has always ordered the fresh inquest. It's not that the attorney general's authority dictates that it happens. It's just that if the attorney general sees that there are sufficient grounds, the high court is likely to also agree, because the application obviously is sound. So if we end up getting that decision,
and at that point, sorry, Ted, just to interrupt. So at that point, when the high court are looking at the application that's been given the okay by the attorney general, it's not only that they're ordering a new inquest, they actually quash the original one. So it's as if you start from scratch. Fresh inquest, completely fresh inquest.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure what more to say about. I mean, I think the big news here obviously is the withdrawal of the decision. It's a very big deal. As Matt said, we don't know of any examples of this ever happening before. It is clearly a testament to how unlawful and ridiculous the attorney general's decision was that the family received back in June. That the family submitted a letter to the attorney general, and before even having to essentially appeal the decision, the attorney general backed down and withdrew her decision. So, and in our mind, so the big question, of course, a lot of people's assumption might be, well, what are they going to do next? What do they have up their sleeve? Are they just going to sit on this for another 6 months or a year or however long and come up with a whole new set of reasons why the application fails to meet the test for a new inquest? Of course, we don't know. There's a possibility of that, and it's impossible to sort of quantify that possibility. However, let me see if somebody's waiting to be admitted here. However, we believe that if the attorney general tried to do that, it would not go well for the attorney general. First and foremost, because there is no valid grounds upon which to deny the application. There simply isn't. This should have been a slam dunk from the beginning. It should not have taken 2 years. It was absolutely ludicrous that the application was denied. It's not a matter of the attorney general's discretion as to whether this new inquest should be opened. There's a very clear and simple legal test, which was easily met by the application. So there's simply no other grounds that the attorney general could possibly come up with that would have a chance of passing legal muster. So that is first and foremost the reason why we are very confident. But if they were to try something, it would not look great for the attorney general's office. It would look like they had a sort of a predetermined outcome in mind, and they were sort of fishing around for reasons to put forth a set of reasons to deny it and then withdraw it and then come back again. It would not look good for the attorney general's office in the courts. We would obviously challenge it and have a good chance of prevailing. So yeah, we are quite confident, I guess, is the simple way to put it. Matt, do you want?
Yeah, I mean, if they did come back and deny it again, we would go through the same process of that. You've got 3 months to do judicial review, apply for a judicial review, and we already know what we put down in the original, the substantive grounds that we placed in front of the attorney general. They have no wiggle room at all, and so it's really hard for us to envisage what they would put in there that they could back up and not lose again should we go to judicial review. I mean, I think for me it's very clear they know we mean business, and we also know small details like the people who ended up responding this time in the last week are a lot more senior than the people that actually gave the original decision back in June. Just some senior people have looked at this within the Attorney General's office, realised they stand absolutely no chance, and have backed down. So I find it. I mean, it's possible that they might still deny it, but we think it's unlikely. But obviously, we can't guarantee it that we're going to get the right decision. But we're pretty confident. Time frame's tricky though, isn't it, Ted? We're hopeful it's by the end of the year. There doesn't seem to be any reason why not. It also would have been very strange if you've got a lot of senior people in a very short period of time. They were given basically 2 weeks to focus on, okay, we're being threatened with litigation. They've had a lot of people looking at it right now to go and sort of mothball it, do anything for months. Making any sense. So, whatever you may think of legal government, very unlikely to do that. They're going to, be on it straight away. We hope and we think.
Yeah. And so just as far as we feel like 2 or 3 months at the most to get the actual decision, as Matt said. And then I was taking some notes earlier today when we were talking to our barrister. It's something like, supposing the Attorney General does approve the application, the Campbell family has something like a month to then file with the High Court. And then we would expect the High Court decision to be made within, say, 2 to 3 months. And we would press them to sort of move quickly because the family has already waited over 2 years for this, when it should have been a much, much faster process. And then here's the long wait, is once the High Court orders the new inquest, it could take up to a year for the new inquest to get started. There will be maybe some pre inquest kind of procedures to go through. I can't remember the details of that. But we're looking at about a year from whenever the High Court approves it. So you add all this up, we're talking about a year and a half, 2 years from now when this inquest might get started. One of the things we wanted to touch on, I think maybe before we open it up to questions, is just to give a little more context about like what inquests are. Matt obviously said some things in the beginning about that, but to emphasize that for those of us in the U.S., when we hear the word coroner, we think medical examiner, we think autopsy, etc. In the United Kingdom, a coroner is quite different. It's not a pathologist or somebody that performs autopsies. Most coroners in the UK are actually lawyers. You can be either a lawyer or a doctor, and something like 98% of them are lawyers. And so they're essentially judicial officials who conduct this inquiry that Matt described into the basic facts of the person's death and ultimately the cause of death. And their scope is broad. I've come across a few examples of the kinds of things that coroners have sort of included in their official conclusions about the cause of death of people in the past. And so you have examples of somebody who committed suicide and they were they were addicted to gambling. And the coroner concluded that the gambling company, for example, was, I don't want to say liable necessarily, but that the practices of the gambling company contributed to this person committing suicide. Air pollution causing exacerbating asthma and causing a young child to die. And having all sorts of experts testify about things like air pollution and whatnot. So the scope is very broad. And so in this situation, the coroner would be looking at the totality of evidence that has been produced over the last 20 plus years about the cause of the destruction of the North Tower in particular, but really all 3 buildings. The scope will not go beyond that because it's not a question of who, that it is just establishing the cause, but the coroner, it is completely within the coroner's kind of scope of work to look at all of the evidence that we would present that demonstrates that the North Tower was brought down by controlled demolition. One other thing to emphasize is that, which people might have picked up over the last couple of years of following this story, is that there's the inquest itself, the conclusion of the coroner doesn't lead to any sort of legal, doesn't trigger any sort of other legal proceeding. There's no criminal or civil liability that emerges out of the conclusions of the coroner. So in this situation, if the coroner does ultimately conclude that Geoff died because the North Tower was brought down with explosives, nobody's going to automatically just start investigating it. No official authority, and also Matt's family would not, for example, have the grounds now to say, well, we can sue and for somebody for causing this. The evidence that is presented during the course of the inquest could well be used by authorities, or could be at least cited and then probably elaborated upon if there was some sort of civil trial, whether in the US or in the UK. But the inquest itself is just a stamp, basically saying this is the proximate cause, this is the cause of this person's death. Of course, one more thing to note is that this is a inquests are there's thousands of inquests held every year in the UK. Many of them are widely reported on because they have to do when it's a more controversial thing. Inquests are often held, and 95% of the time, the reason the cause of death isn't, it's an unnatural death, but it's not something that's that notable. It's not something that's going to make headlines. But practically every day in the UK, there are headlines about inquests. About the and so some of the examples that I cited, I have news articles about that are reporting in the Guardian or other British newspapers what the conclusions of the coroner were. So this is with a case like this, we obviously know the bias of the mainstream media. However, there's no way that they would not report on this, and it would be obviously monumental if a coroner were to reach that conclusion. Now, the media might start to criticize the sanity of the coroner. Who knows? But it would be widely reported, and I think would spill over well beyond the UK. So that's one of the reasons why we're pursuing this. Why Matt is pursuing it, and I think Matt, he gave an interview earlier this week where I think it became, he made it very clear, as he's done all along, that this is very much about his brother and getting establishing some truth about why his brother died. But it's even about more than that. Matt realizes that there's huge significance of 9/11 and what it did to our world, and that ultimately he would like to see this lead to some positive change in the world, lead to some raising awareness about what really happened on 9/11. Matt, do you want to speak to that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, how would those ripples go out? I mean, I've always held that initially, we as family members have a lot of power, both, legal clout, whether it be in the US, the UK. I know it's hard in the US to do litigation. The first thing I would like to see is if we, do get it in our favor, or not in our favor, we do actually prove that my brother died through explosives, is that would encourage other family members to either they already had their inquest to perhaps have the same thing go through the process to get their inquest reopened, but also just widely give family members more faith in these aren't conspiracy theories. These are, there's evidence backing up what we're saying, and it's been proven in a court of law, and for them to go wherever they pursue and to take those findings to help kind of get people the word out that it certainly isn't the official narrative that we've been told so many years. There's something else happened. Yeah, and like I've already said, an inquest is held in a court of law. The coroner's court is peculiar on its own, but it's where it sits in the legal system. But it is a court of law, and it's the first time evidence of controlled demolition will actually be put in front of a legal system in a court. Should we take some questions, Ted? Because we've got half an hour.
Yeah,
want to take some?
So, yeah, but I think we forgot to announce, if you have a question, Gene Laratonda is taking your question. So just chat to him that you have a question, and he'll put you in the queue.
Okay. We currently have 4 questions. David, do you want to ask them, or do you want me to unmute somebody? I see you, Barbara. You're the fourth person. Do we want the person to read their question themselves, or just want me to read it?
I think you should read it, Gene.
Okay. The first one is from Paul Whitcomb. Is there any scenario wherein the Attorney General would be forced to explain his original June decision? It could be revealing to learn which individuals or groups had compelled or coerced.
I don't think there will be any situation, and I guess in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter at the moment because they have backed down. But that's what they would have had to explain, what was their reasoning behind their decision, and clearly they didn't feel that they could back up, certainly not in a legal proceedings, why they made those irrational and unlawful decisions. I don't think there's any way of certainly not going after the individuals or even finding out, who really made that decision. All we've got is the the communications to the barrister telling us the decision they made back in June, and two people's names attached to that.
Thank you, Matt. Second question from David Chandler to Ted. Ted, what's your role in this? What other organizations are involved?
Yeah, so I mean, my role is that I met Matt. I was aware maybe back in 2015 that he was interested in this idea and trying to raise funds to do it, to hire a barrister and go through the process of trying to reopen the inquest. And I did, it's funny that it took a while for it to click for me. It maybe it's just such a foreign idea in the U.S., this idea of an inquest. But in 2018, Matt and I started to talk more, and Matt made the trip over to the U.S. for the 9/11 anniversary that year, where we really started to talk about it and sort of figure out how it could be done, and thought about different ways of going about it. And then sort of fast forward to the summer of 2020, so about a year and a half later, we started talking to this barrister who Nick had originally started a conversation with back in 2015, I believe. Did you, Matt?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so I've just been working with Matt and supporting him, basically. I helped raise the funds for the initial drafting of the application that Matt's barrister, Nick Stanich, did. And I then actually spent the year after that, from the summer of 2020 to the summer of 2021, putting the application together, working with Nick and Matt to do it. And it was a huge process, and obtaining expert witness statements from several experts in the 9/11 Truth Movement, as well as a handful of eyewitnesses who I tracked down and got them to give statements that were part of this application, and who have basically promised to pledge to testify if there is a new inquest. So I was very much involved in putting the application together as well, which, as Matt mentioned, ended up totaling about 2,500 pages. And since then, just working with Matt and supporting him, and now through this latest phase, helping him strategize and helping him get out the word as well. And so that the International Center for 9/11 Justice.
Sorry, Ted.
The International Center for 9/11 Justice is the main organization, I guess the only organization working with Matt's family at this point in time. Hopefully that grows. Maybe once this thing starts to open up, maybe other 9/11 family organizations or other legal aid type organizations get involved. I don't know. That would be cool. So we'll see on that front. But Matt?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, you've been invaluable with all the help over the years. I mean, I don't think we would have been able to have put it all together in the way that we did it, with just working with a barrister on his own. Because obviously all of this is completely new to him. But, I think the key thing was getting the experts and the eyewitnesses together, which, would have been very hard to have done with just me over here on my own. And yeah, thanks, Ted.
My pleasure.
Next question is mine. You kind of touched on this, Matt. You mentioned that any repatriated remains back to the UK triggered an inquest. Have there been other British families attempting to join you in this or separate inquests? And is there an equivalent to a class action lawsuit in the UK?
The question about the class a lawsuit? No, I mean, there are. You can do something similar, but it doesn't apply in this case because we're trying to just get an inquiry into the cause of death. The inquest that my brother had was part of a joint inquiry, or joint inquest. There were 9 of the victims British who had remains identified and repatriated back. We tried to contact all the families that had inquests and to let them know as a courtesy what we were doing. And, you know, although I've had sort of support from a couple of people representing 2 of the victims, not in the inquest, just in general from the UK, although, you know, they support what I'm doing, they don't want to go public and don't want to get involved to the extent that obviously I have and my family have. I mean, in theory, if a new British victim's identified and remains repatriated, there would be a fresh inquest. Not that I think the press would report on it, because there was no coverage whatsoever of the original 2013 inquest.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to add. I want just to add one thing real quick. I think we learned from Nick Stanage, the barrister today, that it's likely that if a new inquest is ordered by the High Court, that the West London coroner who would perform the new inquest would probably contact the other families and ask them if they would like to participate, if they would like the inquests into their loved one, the death of their loved ones, to also be reopened and considered along with yours, because I believe all of them died in the destruction of the towers. And so, yeah, others. It's conceivable that other families would join at that juncture.
Thank you. Barbara had her hand up. She was next. Barbara, do you just want to ask your own question? I've asked to unmute you.
Well, thank you, Matt, so much. I do feel there's a really bright light at the end of this tunnel, and you're to be congratulated for all of us. What is it, 22 and more years later? And finally, there's something really positive, potentially positive here. So my question is, and this would be for you and also Ted, or both, and that is, it's my understanding from reading everything that you've sent and A&E originally sent and Ted has sent, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the original 2,500 or so page submission, as well as the 21-page recent submission, they're not public. We can't read them. So is that correct? And could you tell us why?
That is correct. It's well, mainly the guidance from our barrister. He just has a way of working where you don't make anything public, you know, because it may come back and cause issues for you. But this is something you're asking about today and before, Ted, because I know you're always trying to get what we can out there in the public. So perhaps you've probably got a better answer as to why we haven't made it public.
Oh, so it's a strategy decision. There's no requirement by law that it not be made public. It's Nick Stanish's strategy recommendation that's being followed. Is that right?
Not exactly. No, it's actually it's sort of what's a matter of like what's done and what's not done in British legal practice. Once something enters a court, it is a public document, you know, I think like it is in the US. But for some reason, this type of application to an attorney general, for example, that was submitted 2 years ago, is not made public. And in fact, somebody did submit a FOIA or the equivalent of a FOIA request to the attorney general's office, asking for the application to be disclosed. And the attorney general's office consulted with Nick Stanage, our Matt's barrister, and I think both parties agreed not to disclose it. So I don't know. I can't speak authoritatively on what exactly is the law or what is the practice. I guess if Matt's family and the attorney general both wanted to disclose it, it could be done. Perhaps it's not like it has to be kept private, but if both parties or even one party, the family, wants it to remain confidential, it can. And that is what is common practice with this type of document. With the 21-page document, it's a little different because it's not the application itself. The 21-page document, as of now, it's like a draft. It's like if you don't reverse your decision, this is what we will submit. This is what we will file with the courts. it's showing them this is what's coming. And so that I would say is maybe a little more on the strategic side of we don't want to show the public kind of what our arguments are. And in the end, I don't know if there'd be some greater good served by releasing it. But in the end, right now it would not serve any good for us to release it. I think.
Yeah, I understand. So just a quick follow-up, and that is, do I understand correctly for all of us then that once you hopefully do have a filing or do have an inquest reopened and or file with the High Court, if you have to, that then whatever you file with the inquest, the coroner's inquest reopened, or the court will be public?
That is correct. That is my understanding, based on our discussions with the barrister over the last month or two, that if we did seek judicial review, file with the court, that the original application then would be submitted to the court and would become part of the public record.
By original, you mean the 2,500 page?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. If you guys don't mind, before I ask the next two questions, I'd like to preface it with a clip from The Unspeakable that Matt gave. It's about a minute long. Let me share my screen here real quick. And just listen to this.
2 footprints of the towers, and there's just this huge spread of remains that were once people. Okay, we know the steel beams were propelled out with huge forces, but the actual physical stuff that I care about, people and my brother, were ejected outside of the footprints, and it's so unpleasant thinking about it. But I've since read a lot that has been published about the search to try and identify people. Is this concept of commingling?
The explosive force that blew over fire trucks and peeled stone facades from buildings also disintegrated human bodies, turning bones into flying shrapnel. The tidal wave of debris that carried human remains blocks away, depositing them in some cases on top of buildings, also fused soft tissue into bone fragments.
And that basically means the impact of the force of the explosion, not just the pancake collapse or whatever, has actually mingled remains into my brother. And so the only explanation she could give me was they couldn't get a clear single DNA match in those remains. So I just got this horrible vision of other people's remains being removed from my brother's face. It was just,
That's not going to happen from crushing. A building collapses and 2 or more people are crushed. I can't envision a situation in which the soft tissue of one victim is hurled with such force as to become embedded into, attached to a bony fragment of another victim. I can't envision that.
For those that don't know, that is Cyril Wecht, internationally known forensic pathologist that was involved in the JFK autopsy investigation. The next questions are, Nick, if the buildings were brought down by explosives, there would be huge rubble piles where the towers once stood. I think we need to consider something else might have brought them down. I don't think we know what really happened on 9/11. Have you looked at the picture showing that there are basically no rubble across the entire WTC collapse?
Matt, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, I'd argue that there was a lot of dust. I was actually asked this question yesterday. I can't remember if it was in the pub or whether it was part of the talk, but there's 110 stories, of which 7 were the atrium. The mech floors had slightly more concrete on them, but you're talking the total height of concrete was probably no more than 10 meters from the whole of the building. If you actually add each 10 centimeter floor up, it is a lot of concrete, and obviously it was a huge area. But there was an awful lot of dust deposited on the site in the surrounding areas, and you see it in the videos. It's just being ejected, and you see all the dust clouds and stuff. I don't know. For me, there was a lot of steel and there was a lot of concrete and recovered.
Great.
I don't know if that answers the question. Ted, is there anything you want to add or correct?
I agree. I don't have to add to that.
Yep. Thank you. The next one's from Ray. In the documentary 9/11 Press for Truth, Patty Casaza, one of the Jersey girls, stated that in a phone call from her husband, John Casaza, from the 104th floor in the North Tower, that her husband told her that he thought there was a bomb that had gone off in the building. Is this information from phone calls from one or more occupants who died in the North Tower, re bombs in the building, part of your evidence, in addition to reports of people who lived and reported bombs explosions to reporters?
We've certainly got eyewitness statements that, certainly from the work of Graham McQueen, which Ted's very familiar with, basically talking about bombs, explosions, etc. Not going to go into, who are eyewitnesses, but we do have that as part of our application.
Thank you.
And if I understood the question, there was something added on there, or just eyewitness accounts from others besides the people in the towers. I mean, so if I heard the question correct, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, clearly not those that died, but so it's from people who have survived and are willing to take the stand in a court of law and be, cross-examined about statements they made back then and now.
Yeah, there's something like 100. So we documented the, Graham McQueen talks about the 156 that he documented, that he cataloged. That number ended up going up to something like 186 that were gathered during my research with him on the TV reporters, as well as finding other stray ones, and so all of those are part of the application, as well as the witness statements from 5 witnesses who actually signed statements as part of this application. As far as Matt, just Ray, this is Ray McGinnis, who's the author of the Unanswered Questions. I think is probably the one who asked that. He asked me if I knew of any other people who were in the top sections of the towers, or any part of the towers that reported explosions inside the towers. And maybe because I know that you're very familiar with what it was like in the buildings before they came down on the top. If you were aware of any other, besides Patty Casaza talking about it, any other eyewitness reports specifically hearing explosions up there in that?
No, I mean, the stuff that I listened to a lot was obviously a lot of the telephone calls, the 911 calls, etc. I don't recall any, but it's one of those things you listen to so much. But I mean, I can't recall, and I haven't specifically put that into the application.
Okay.
Great. There is a lengthy question from Norman. Let me read this. Matt, sorry for your loss, and I commend you for your concerted effort over the years to keep the memory of your brother alive and fighting for a new investigation. I'm not well read up on exactly what processes you've followed and what kind of leverage you've tried to use to get this new investigation to happen. I do have a suggestion that could help you and your requests, or if you mention some additional information for your application and when you do get your day in court. This is information you might not know of. I wonder, has Ted, Walter, or anyone in the 9/11 Truth Movement ever told you about 2 major court cases from 2007 that could possibly help your cause? These 2 court cases were whistleblower, Ketom cases that were filed against 23 NIST subcontractors for science fraud. The cases were based on False Claims Act that basically meant the U.S. government or any organization was not allowed to psyops on the American public. But I think Obama scrapped the act, so now the U.S. government and organizations may carry out psyops on the American people. Almost done. One of these cases went as far as being filed in the Supreme Court in 2009, but the 9/11 Truth Movement has effectively been censoring this information. So, Ted, could you tell us of evidence presented in these cases that the controlled demolition and thermite theories cannot explain? Things like the lack of seismic readings for 2 10-story buildings hitting the ground, the 16 survivors in Stairway B of the North Tower, the undamaged bathtub, the mostly undamaged basements, the disappearance of 90% of World Trade Center 3, 75% of World Trade Center 4, the missing insides of WTC 6, the cold fuming of the rubble pile for 100 days. There are many more anomalies. So Ted, he's asking about those.
I'm not aware of those cases. I think I might have seen a flicker of them somewhere mentioned on the internet. I'm not aware of the evidence that was presented in them. I'm not clear if this is the directed energy weapon hypothesis or the nuclear hypothesis or a combination thereof. I am not a scientist, but I've read a lot over the years, and I know that there's some portion of the 9/11 truth movement that is very convinced by Judy Wood's argument that there was directed energy weapons used. I have found the evidence of thermite or thermite related devices and high explosives in the core of the buildings to be more persuasive. I think that there's actually undue attention put onto this issue of what the specific mechanisms were, when the most important thing is that it was not a natural building collapse, that it was not a structural failure. I think that the key here is that something was done, that these devices were used, some sort of technology was used to bring the buildings down. That was not the airplanes and the fires. So I think an undue amount of focus is put on that question, and it tends to cause more division and dissent and dissension and whatnot than progress by focusing on it. So that's my sense.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what we heard from Cyril Wecht, that the embedding of the soft tissue into the bony fragments was from some type of explosive effect. I don't want to lose sight of that. The next question, getting back to it, I think it's better. Sandra asks, I know that this is about legal process, but I don't want to lose sight of Geoff, your brother, the human being. Can you share one thing you would like for us to know about him?
Golly. He had a real sense of adventure, and I'd say after a couple of years of wanting to be a wannabe trader, he started sort of doing freelance work more in the IT world in the banks, and his work took him to places like Copenhagen and Istanbul. He'd interrailed across Europe, like a cheap way of seeing Europe, when he was a teenager. And then when he moved out to the States to work for Reuters, they had him all over the place in South America, and he loved it. And one of the last things he sort of said to Mum was, don't worry about me, because she'd always worry, mums do. And, he said, yeah, I'll be fine. And if something does happen, it's just because I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Wow.
Thank you, Matt. I think that is all the questions. I think I've asked them all. Thank you so much, Matt, for everything you're doing.
Okay, thank you, Gene, for a great job of fielding those questions. And is there any last remarks that you would like to make, Ted, and any announcements, for example?
Nothing in particular. Just, stay tuned for the decision from the Attorney General to come out in the next month or two. I guess I will say that we are going to, later this week, from October 3rd or 4th until October 15th, the International Center for 9/11 Justice is going to have a fall membership drive. So I would ask you, everyone here, who believes in our work and believes in the importance of this issue, to sign up and donate, whatever you can on a monthly basis, $5, $10. We will be giving Peace War 9/11, the new film featuring Graham McQueen, as a gift for anyone who's able to donate $10 or more per month, as well as to all of our existing sustaining supporters. So keep an eye out for those emails, and please sign up so that we can keep doing this work. Unfortunately, it can't be done for free, but you will be making a huge difference by supporting this organization. And my last comment is to thank Matt for his courage and hard work and dedication. This is all happening because of him and his family. And so thank you, Matt.
Cheers, Ted. I'm not just to say thanks to everyone, who's been part of trying to get to the truth of what happened on 9/11. I know it's going to be, potentially crazy over the next few months, particularly if we get a positive decision. I always find these sort of 2 or 3 months leading up to the anniversary hard to deal with, not just because it's, that, I guess, reflection on what happened, but, there tends to be this focus, and it just happens in the last couple of years we seem to be doing all this legal stuff when I want to just be hanging out at festivals and stuff in the summer. But serious note, there is going to be stuff happening, and so the best way of following what's happening in the case is ic911.org, but also on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days. My handle's Matt Campbell 911, and you can follow bits and pieces of what I tweet there. And it's just, I remain positive that we're going to get a good outcome, and it will be before the end of the year.
I do want to add that we are going to be continuing this conversation in the 9/11 War Room. It's coming on at 5 o'clock. It's every Sunday at 5 p.m. at 911warroom.com. Thanks again for everybody for everything. In memory of Geoff.
That's 5 o'clock Eastern time, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Gene, for that. And you always have these nice little surprises for us, which is wonderful. And Sandra, thank you for your personal question to Matt. I think that really adds something you add a lot by learning a little bit about Geoff. And gosh, it really does appear. Thanks to Ted for helping Matt, and thank you both for this amazing process you've been through. I really think that you have this legal system in the UK backed in a corner. And I think I do have reason to feel optimistic and not cynical about this, which I was feeling cynical before. I have reason to feel optimistic now. And I think that if this goes through as we envision, it will be ammunition for the other family members. So thank you very, very much. It's very, very important work. And thank you, Matt, for trying to find the answer for your brother's death. It's very important to all of us.
Thanks, Rob.
Am I missing anything here? I guess thank the audience. Thank all of you for coming. It's always nice when you throw a party to have people come to the party. So thanks for coming. And any last words?
Yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for all the things that all of you out there have done, are doing. I see Alan Golding here, who helped make the unspeakable. I don't know if so great to see you here, and great to see all of you. Thank you so much.
Don Plummer, I didn't forget your note here, just for anyone's use. He has significant assortment of 9/11 Truth Outreach materials. He's compiling a list of and available to anyone that desires. His email is grandjunctioninfocinema@gmail.com. These materials are being gifted to requesters. And that's all. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye, Matt.